Today's episode of Beyond the Mask is presented by the insurance specialists at Bright Think Wealth Strategies. Find the disability insurance coverage that fits you best right now. Email Robert Smith at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. The show is also made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. Get a free consultation today to be guided through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Just visit crnafinancialplanning.com. We'd also like to thank Helping Hands and OSA EMR for their support of the show. And don't forget, listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits. For more information on how you can submit them, check out the CE Credit tab on our website, beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to Beyond the Mask, Innovation and Opportunities for CRNAs with Jeremy Stanley and Sharon Pierce. We know you spend your day caring for your patient's best interests. On our show, we want to care for you. Join us as we leave the operating room and learn the latest in the CRNA industry. Beyond the Mask starts in 10, 9, 8, 7.
Welcome to Beyond the Mask. I'm Jeremy Stanley, and I've been working with CRNAs for over 23 years, and I'm married to one. And my co-host is
Sharon Pierce.
Sharon's a practicing CRNA for over 20 years, a past president of the ANA, the NCANA, and she's held many other leadership roles. As usual, our goal with every episode is to educate and enlighten CRNAs, and I think our topic today is definitely going to do that. And Sharon, what time is it?
It's time to wake up, Jeremy.
I think it is. Well, hello, Sharon. Welcome to the show.
The Beyond the Mask podcast.
That's right. And we're together again through Zoom.
I know. I'm ready to be back in the studio, though.
I know. You know what? We're going to do some crazy things to the studio, too. We're gonna jazz it up a little bit this year. That'll be our goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the cameras in there,
yeah,
we're
going to
dress nicer.
Well, of course, I got to be careful with that. When Pierce learned that we had a studio and, we closed the door and put black curtains up and had a camera, he got a little iffy there. So we got to be careful talking
now
about
we're
those
going to
cameras.
have 3 cameras.
That's right. We'll have multiple angles.
Oh, my goodness. I learned something recently about that multiple angle thing, because we're in the middle of we're in the middle of shooting this documentary about nurses in elected office, and we just went up and filmed Eddie Bernice Johnson in Washington, D.C. a week and a half ago. She's the first nurse to ever serve in Congress, so we filmed her for the documentary, and they had a couple of cameras going, and I asked them, why do you have 2 cameras? So when they edit, you don't see somebody move wrong. You go from
they can go from one
this
pose
side
to the next.
to this side. So there's a reason why they have multiple cameras.
Wow, that is not the explanation I thought you were going to give. So that's interesting.
I don't even want to go there, Jeremy. Let's not even go there.
Well, we have another great show put together today for our listeners, and I know you're excited about this one, and we've been waiting for a little while to get this one done, but tonight we have with us Miss Holly Chandler. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you, and we're going to be talking about a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart, and we've hit on it a little bit on other shows, but we're going to be talking about SRNAs and what they're having to deal with during their training, incivility, bullying by other healthcare providers. And, this is a topic I know that has come to the forefront a lot in recent years. And I think our listeners are going to learn a lot about, what's going on out there. And in fact, some of them might be the perpetrators themselves, and maybe it'll turn their behavior around. What do you think, Holly?
Yeah. So I do think it is a really important topic. And I think that it is really great that you guys have me here today to talk about this. I did do a dissertation on incivility and bullying. I do think that one of the things that came to light for me was that I think a lot of preceptor CRNAs that participate in incivility aren't really aware that they're participating in incivility.
Interesting.
that SRNAs are perceiving their actions as being incivil or bullying.
Well, awareness is the first step, isn't it? I guess to a lot of things. But before we dive into this topic, Holly, why don't you tell our listeners where you're at, where you teach at, and how you initially became interested in this topic?
Yeah, thanks. So I am a associate professor at Bryan College of Health Sciences in the School of Nurse Anesthesia in Lincoln, Nebraska. I live in Omaha, so I drive about 50 miles to and from Lincoln every day to work. When I decided to go become a faculty, I had to go back to school and get a doctorate. And as you know, Sharon, that was quite an endeavor at my age.
I understand.
So taking that on, I wanted to make my dissertation something really meaningful, and as everybody does. When I got into my doctoral program, it really struck me the emphasis that they put on the importance of how everybody needed to treat each other with respect, and students and faculty, and that seemed really different for me, coming from having been in a master's program back in the early 2000s in anesthesia school. And so I kind of just really wanted to focus on that. And that's how I got interested in it, that juxtaposition of what it was like when I went to school before and what it was like when I went to school now. And that's how I got interested in the topic, along with having students come into my office, having experienced some of these situations with incivility and bullying themselves, wanting to make a difference with that.
Well, Holly, I'm going to kick it off with a question, because I don't think I really understand the true difference between incivility and bullying. Can you kind of clarify that for us?
So that's a great question, Jeremy. It's really, they are two very separate concepts, incivility and bullying. And it was really important. My study was about the perceptions of students and what their perceptions of incivility and bullying were. So in the study, it was really important that I differentiate those two concepts for them before I interviewed them. When I sat down to interview them, I had the definitions of both of them for the participants in front of them. And incivility is basically defined as actions that are ambiguous, so they can be non-intentional. They're non-physical. They involve disruptive behaviors. I kind of call them junior high.
Okay.
They're kind of like junior high behaviors, eye rolling, telling secrets, rumor spreading, isolating someone or excluding them. And they create a disruptive environment. And they can or may escalate to bullying.
Okay.
And then bullying can often be repeated. It is health harming mistreatment and of one or more people by one or more perpetrators. And it is abusive, and it can take the form of verbal abuse, threatening behavior, intimidating or humiliating behavior, and or it can be sabotage. It is intentional, it is purposeful, and it is, like I said, often repeated, and it will always cause harm.
So incivility may be unintentional, but bullying is intentional.
100%.
Right.
Wow.
Sharon, I'm going to throw this out there. Have you ever felt bullied in your profession? I mean, and I'm just asking as a CRNA, not as a student, but is there ever been, I'm just thinking out loud as Holly was speaking there, has there been a time that you felt either one of these, I guess, because
I think incivility is pretty much, or it's not as rampant in the OR by surgeons as it used to be. You've got to remember, I've been a nurse almost 38 years. I've had bags of blood thrown at me. I've had instruments thrown at me only once by each perpetrator. Trust me.
So I'm going to stop you there. That's not incivility. Bags of blood thrown at you is bullying.
All right, then. They were bullying, but they only did it at once. I can tell
Because if you look at those behaviors, if you look at those definitions, Sharon, and that's why it was important for these definitions to be sitting in front of those students.
Oh, you're right. Mm-hmm.
That is intentional, purposeful behavior that is threatening.
Yeah.
A bag of blood being thrown at you is threatening. It's humiliating. intimidating. I mean, that is bullying.
Yeah, well, I guess you're right. And the times that it happened to me in the operating room, I just said, okay, we're in a patient care area. We're not going to talk about this right now. But as soon as this case is over, we're going to have a discussion. And I do think that both of them wet their pants whenever I said that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really fortunate that you have a strong personality. A lot of CRNAs do.
Right.
So
Well, I was an RN then. That was when I was an OR nurse. Now,
okay.
I will tell you, most of the times they don't mess with you if you're giving their anesthesia. Now, I want to quantify that right now because I guarantee you that a surgeon will say something to a female CRNA that he would never say to a male CRNA because, they get into the locker room and the male CRNA will cold cock him. But and I think that's a gender-based thing. And we all know it's true.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'm sitting here listening to you talk. Sharon, I asked you that question for a reason because, I know you and I know most CRNAs that you're in a position where you feel comfortable in saying something back to someone that was doing that. I think, Holly, to your point, SRNAs are scared to say anything back. And that's where our conversation is going. Yeah.
You're exactly right. And I had some really ugly behaviors whenever I was a student. I had an anesthesiologist that was so ugly to me whenever I was a student and I was trying to intubate somebody and the surgeon broke scrub, come up to the head of the bed and told him to quit talking to me like that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Good for him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, students are put in a precarious position because they aren't necessarily in a position where they can take the action that you took, Sharon. They're scared to take that action. My study showed that, when it came to coping, that all 10 participants reported that they weren't going to use resources. They didn't use resources. They reported wanting to keep their head down, just get through it. And that's what they intended to do. Some of them even stated that if they were afraid that if they did report it, that it would make the situation worse and there might be retribution for it.
Yeah. And plus their preceptors are, for all intents and purposes, giving them a grade for what they're doing as well. So there can be ramifications for that as well, correct?
Correct. And the other piece of this is that we need to remember that preceptors are allowing students in their ORs
right
to take care of their patients.
Right.
So that really is a gift,
Mm-hmm.
and that really does put students in a precarious position.
Right.
That doesn't give preceptors the right to mistreat students by any means.
Right.
But it really does put students in a spot. They need to be in those ORs to learn. You can't learn anesthesia any other way. You have to be in the OR.
Now, let me ask you a question. I was in the first class where I went to school at Wake Forest that actually rotated to multiple clinical sites. Used to that everybody stayed at the big house, the mothership, but we started rotating out as the classes started getting larger. Are students more at risk with multiple sites?
I think that is really, has benefits and risks. When students are exposed to multiple preceptors, they're given the gift of learning multiple ways of doing anesthesia. I always tell my students, the day you graduate, you're going to have a little piece of this preceptor and a little piece of this preceptor and a little piece of this preceptor, and you're going to go out in the world and you're going to evolve into your anesthetic. And it's going to be pieces of all these different brilliant preceptors you were with. The risk comes in that, out of all those preceptors, they may encounter a few who are bullies, who treat them uncivil. And that's going to be really unfortunate because, that's going to impede learning for them. And it has a potential to affect their health and well-being. And it has, the potential to make them dislike the profession they chose and all of the effects that my study showed. And so while on one hand, being exposed to all of those different practices and all of those different people is such a huge benefit for students, on the other hand, there is a slight risk to it, you know.
Now, I guess if they are at a clinical site where they may be the only student there and you are not there, but to monitor a situation as the director, it would seem like it would be a little isolating, and that this type of behavior could be gotten away with a lot easier.
I think that, now my study was only 10 students, and it obviously was a qualitative study to look at their perceptions of what they thought incivility and bullying were. It didn't by any means measure amounts of incivility and bullying going on. And it was over 3 programs in the Midwest. And my study showed that students felt like their relationships with preceptors and incivility and bullying were less in rural rotations, in rotations away from their homes clinical sites, and I sort of postulated that maybe that had something to do with the ACT and hierarchical setups that occur in large urban settings. So, I didn't see that, Sharon, in my study. I don't know. They felt very much embraced. They felt like one of the team at their rural rotations. They felt like those people really invested in their learning.
That's comforting to know.
That is.
Oh, yeah.
Have you thought about what would happen if you weren't able to work for 2 or 3 years? On average, 25% of people will file a disability claim, and most of us aren't prepared for that loss of income. Every CRNA needs to protect their biggest asset, yourself, and your ability to earn with a disability insurance policy. We recommend contacting Robert Smith, a master disability insurance specialist with more than 30 years of experience and 1,800 CRNA clients, to find the coverage that fits you best. The best way to do that is to send him an email at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. That's rsmithjr@financialguide.com, or call him at 504-394-6557.
So, Holly, what do you there's obviously resources out there. What do you think the reasoning is that students don't want to or don't utilize the resources to kind of report some of this stuff?
So a couple things. I think that we need to do a better job educating everyone about the resources, first of all. A couple of them said they weren't aware of them. A couple of them said that they were, like I said, they were afraid to utilize the resources, that it would just maybe make things worse, or that nothing would be done. And I think we need to change that narrative. I think that we need to show students, something will be done. If you're being bullied, something will be done. And you do that through policy. Every program, I 100% believe every program and every institution needs to have a zero bullying policy. And, that's it. And, incivility is another thing. It's ambiguous,
Right.
That's going to be, the parties are going to sit down and come to resolution. But bullying needs to be zero tolerance policy. And if you implement that, I think students are going to see that, and I don't think when I presented this at ACDE and then presented at annual Congress, I was honestly a little bit nervous, because CRNAs can be,
Okay, that's all right. We understand. I've been president of this association. I get it.
Yeah.
So
the things that make them hard to get along with make them good at what they do, though.
Exactly. And but I was really surprised. I got so much great feedback and very little negative feedback. But the negative feedback I expected to get, I got, which was, they're all a bunch of babies and they're all a bunch of millennials, and they need to quit whining and buck up and walk uphill in the snow both ways, just like I did, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it was funny because, people that have been doing this 30, 40 years responded right away and said, "You're wrong. This happened to me 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's time. It's time this conversation took place."
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard other CRNAs say those exact same things. And there's a couple people that I know of, and you hear students say they just don't want to work with these people, or they're scared to work with these people because they're so hard on them and so critical. But and then they'll say, oh, they just want everything given to them, and they think they're smarter than everybody else, and they're lazy, and you hear all these things. But I think, to your point, Holly, it's not a new conversation. I mean, Sharon, you probably had to deal with it. Holly, you probably dealt with it. I mean, I know that physicians who are in training have to deal with it. I mean, it's just a cultural thing, it seems like.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess to that, and I can't say this enough, there's constructive feedback, constructive learning, so learning under pressure, which you have to be able to do as a CRNA, as an SRNA. And there's strong feedback, which you have to be able to take as an SRNA and as a CRNA. All of those are very, very different from incivility and bullying.
Right.
What are some of the resources? You talk about resources. What are some of those things? What is available?
So I'm glad you asked that. One of the biggest ones, obviously, is a Title IX coordinator. And everybody in every school, everywhere, in every program should know who their Title IX coordinator is.
Oh, I didn't even know we had one of those. They might not have had them back then.
Yeah.
And almost every college, virtually every college has counseling available. And usually it's free of charge, at least to have an initial consult with a counselor. And those numbers are available usually on the website under student services. Crisis hotlines, there's National Crisis Hotline. There's suicide hotlines. Clinical coordinators are usually good people to utilize as resources. Clinical coordinators usually are clinical coordinators, and they're not that. They got those positions because they're good with students. Mm-hmm. And so they're usually great resources. Dean of students at colleges is a great resource. The dean of the program is usually a great resource. There might be a faculty that is particularly works well with students, or a trusted preceptor that you can go to. So those are just some of the resources. The other place to get resources is on the AANA website. There are student resources on there, and there's resources on there for quite a few things actually for students. There's things for things like fatigue and stress and incivility and bullying and burnout. I mean, they just have a whole bunch of resources on the AANA website.
So what would you say to a CRNA who notices that a colleague is bullying or being uncivil to a student?
So if you have a colleague who is being uncivil to a student, I think that starts with a conversation. Like I said, a lot of times with incivility and CRNAs are such direct, blunt people. We just are. And a lot of times we say things, and I think it's true. A lot of times students can interpret that as being incivil, and it's not. Sometimes our sense of humor is a little bit off, and that might be interpreted as uncivil. So to a student or a CRNA who interprets something as being uncivil, I would say, man, communicate directly, right? With that, did you mean that? Did you mean to say fill in the blank? Because I took it this way. And usually that's going to clear it up. I bet most of the time. We've had cases where a CRNA made a joke and the student thought the CRNA meant it. And the CRNA was kidding, but said it in that sarcastic CRNA way.
Yeah.
And the student was devastated, and turned out the CRNA was, kidding around. And so had this SRNA felt comfortable enough to say, do you mean that? Is that true? And the CRNA would have gone, what? No, I'm kidding, and then that would have been the end of that. So honestly, clear, concise, the C's of communication, direct communication right away, I think is really a great idea. Now, bullying is a different story, Sharon. If you witness somebody bullying, a direct reporting to a supervisor. Again, I think that is a no tolerance policy situation.
Beyond the Mask is made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. With almost 2 decades of experience, the firm guides CRNAs through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Schedule a free consultation today by calling 855-304-3748 or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
So, Holly, the SRNAs that were involved in your study, obviously they were brave in coming forward to you and telling you their story. And how did you encourage them to do that and keep their privacy and safety and so forth?
It was a phenomenological study, and I did have a purposeful sample, meaning the participants chose whether or not they wanted to participate. So I sent out an email to the deans of 3 Midwest programs, and then they distributed emails to their student body. Those students contacted me if they wanted to participate in the study, and then I contacted them. When I did the interviews with them, we selected a private place away from their clinical site and their school that was secluded, and I conducted the interviews there, and they selected a pseudonym. And so that was how I de-identified them in the study.
Okay. And that makes sense. Again, I'm just sitting here thinking there ought to be some way in every program, and not necessarily just taking one student's word for this, because, I've known situations where students weren't doing well and they've kind of come back on the school and done things like that. But I mean, if there's if every student is afraid to work with Bob CRNA and they don't like Bob CRNA because he does X, Y, and Z, there should be some kind of ramifications from someone in your seat to go to the higher ups and say, Bob is doing this to our students. Is there not anything in place like that in most institutions?
I don't really know of any. I do know of a situation in another state where several students were upset with a preceptor, and the institution then did some educating with that preceptor, which was a great situation.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking back, and, I've heard students and who are now, CRNAs, and I'm actually thinking of this one guy right now in my head, and the students hated working with him. Hated. I mean, he could be suggestive to the female folks. He was very degrading to the male folks. And, I know this guy, and he's now somewhere, and he's a chief CRNA. And, I often wonder what...
That's to get him from the bedside.
Well, yeah, maybe so. I don't know. But... I don't know if there should be some sort of mechanism that if this is something that's happening with more than one student over a certain time period, that there needs to be some sort of ramification to that, whether it is educational in nature, whether it's a warning, whatever it is. I mean,
well, I think they police it, and when I say that, I believe that Holly probably knows who the offenders are, and you just don't put students with them anymore.
Well, honestly, that's up to the institutions, because they're the ones that have that are the employers of the preceptors. The schools we don't hire the preceptors. The institutions do.
Sure.
But, I mean, it's not up to us to discipline preceptors. We can't do that.
Yeah. So, but I do think there is some self-policing that goes on. I mean, I remember in school there were people that nobody wanted to be with, and eventually that would kind of make its way out, and so they didn't have students anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, and the ones that really enjoy students, and so they seem to always have one. So I do think that there is some self-policing that goes on in that regard, and I could be Pollyanna, but it just seemed to be what happened even, in the Ice Age whenever I went to school.
Well, and I think a big fix is just going to be culture is the hardest thing in the world to change,
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, a big fix is just going to be to continue to educate about it, just continue educating the SRNAs, continue educating the CRNAs. And there's lots of ways we can do that. And I mean, you guys are helping do that right now.
So I guess this is something else that I think about overall in society. We seem to be less civil as a whole.
Really?
I know they're relating that back to
shocking.
COVID and the isolation
Politics.
and lots of different things. But I'm wondering if you're seeing that trickle down in the clinical area. Does this seem to be getting worse or?
Gosh, that's a great question. I wrote my dissertation before COVID, and I think the first sentences of it were that incivility and bullying permeate all aspects of our lives today. That's the first line in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think it's because of COVID. I think incivility and bullying have been around, I don't know, it feels like for a while.
But you don't perceive that it's any worse. It's just kind of same.
I think it's better than when you and I were students.
Right, because, that makes sense. More of a zero tolerance. We did put up with things. And back then it was more sexual harassment kind of issue than you deal with now. I mean, now people
that was everywhere.
No tolerance. You ought to have seen how I learned airway. I mean, I had help and it was back to belly help. Teaching you how to maintain an airway, and you just stood very still. And
Dear Lord.
So I think you're probably right in that regard, because there's less tolerance of bad behavior in operating rooms than there was 30 years ago.
Yeah. I think there is less tolerance of that kind of thing. And I mean, I've seen situations where surgeons have been, fired from institutions for things that they would have never been fired for, 25 years ago. Bad behavior, temper tantrums type stuff and bullying type stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's better. I think society as a whole, incivility and bullying is tanking, in terms of the grocery store and the drive home and the social media. That's way worse.
Yeah. Well, one thing that you did say or tell us that we know that the COA does site visits, but if the students are reporting this and bullying, it could jeopardize the accreditation of the school.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And, that there's the graduate standards that the COA requires, and there's 51 of those. And some of them are that they be vigilant in the delivery of patient care. And then there's 12 standards under critical thinking. And that's that students utilize interpersonal communication skills that result in effective interprofessional exchange of information, and that they collaborate with other healthcare professionals, and that they teach others, and that they adhere to the code of ethics for CRNAs, and that they interact on a professional level with integrity. And the COA also says that schools or programs need to have clinical site standards. And the big one there is that the program demonstrates that the educational environment at all the clinical sites that their students go to, that those clinical sites are conducive to student learning. So, in my study, I show that if students are experiencing incivility and bullying, the educational experiences are negatively affected. That they said they experience decreased motivation and non-meaningful education. So that standard is out the door. So it could mess with accreditation.
Wow, that's a biggie.
That
It
is a
is.
biggie. Yeah.
It's kind of important.
Well, Holly, as we kind of wrap up here, Sharon always loves to do what we call the lightning round. I don't know whether you've heard us do that before, but this is kind of her little baby, and she's come up with this. So, Sharon, I'm going to let you start with the lightning round here before we have Holly conclude.
Okay, Holly. So, who is your hero?
My children.
How many children do you have?
That's hokey.
No, that's
I have 3 children and 1 son-in-law.
nice.
Holly, who are you grateful for right now? I switched it up. I saw Sharon look down. I switched it up.
Yeah.
I said who instead of what?
I'm going to have to say, well, can I say 2?
Sure.
My husband and my Vishla, they're at home waiting for me.
Oh, okay. All right.
50 miles from where you're at right now.
50 miles from where
50
I am right
miles?
now.
Oh, wow. Wow. Jeez.
So when you feel fear, what do you do first?
You know, I have, I was a trauma nurse before I was the CRNA, and I've just always been a jump back and assess the situation and then take action. So that's always my go-to, assess and react.
All right, Holly, if you had 1 year left to live, what would you do?
I think I'm probably gonna travel a lot, go see the Aurora Borealis.
Well, even if you're not going to be living, or you are going to be living another year, are you going to Croatia to the IFNA meeting?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, we'll
All
see
right.
you there.
We'll be there.
We will be
All
there.
right.
When is it? What month?
It's in
May.
May
May,
1st.
3rd through the 5th.
Yeah.
Oh my
okay.
gosh, you guys are so busy.
Oh, yeah. We're going to be doing podcast taping there
Yeah.
at the meeting. Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Jeez.
There are.
All right. Well, Holly, we want to thank you for being on the show. But before that, is there anything that you want to conclude on to get across to our listeners in dealing with this very, very important issue?
I just think that, again, I can't stress enough that I think every practice and program should have a no tolerance policy in place for bullying. And I think as CRNAs, we should always strive to represent our profession in the best light possible. And I think it is possible to give constructive feedback and provide constructive learning and know how those differ from incivility and bullying.
I think you're exactly right. Well, we want to thank you for being on the show. Thank you for all the good work you've done here and with your students each and every day. And you know, this is going to change the culture of the CRNA community, and we all know that. And it's just getting the word out there. People like you, people who've been through it and say enough is enough, and that'll be the change. And we just got to keep talking about it and keep preparing people to deal with it. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy. Thanks, Sharon.
All
You're
right.
most welcome.
Sharon, I think that's a wrap.
I think so.
We want to thank our listeners for listening to Beyond the Mask with Jeremy Stanley. And
Sharon Pierce.
if you like our show and want to help us grow, Sharon, how can they help us?
Well, the best way is to leave a review for us, 5 stars, and make it
Positive, because there's enough negativity in this world, right?
amen. I think we just had a whole podcast on that.
There you go. There you go. And you know what, Sharon? I'm going to just say that the majority of our listeners, probably 99.9%, are amazing. And they give us really positive feedback. And that's great. And we really appreciate that. We really
Yes,
do.
we do.
So, until next time.
It's a wrap.
As a CRNA, you spend years preparing yourself for this career, so we don't want to see you lose out on any of the income you've worked so hard to earn. The best way to protect yourself and give you the confidence that a major life event won't disrupt your financial future is through disability insurance. We've known disability income specialist Robert Smith for many years and have seen the work he's done with nearly 2,000 CRNAs over multiple decades. He can help identify any gaps in your existing coverage and fill those gaps by finding the best value on a policy. Contact Robert and let him know you heard about him on our podcast. Send him an email at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. That's rsmithjr@financialguide.com. Or call him at 504-394-6557. Protect your greatest asset as a CRNA, yourself and your ability to earn a living by adding disability insurance to your financial plan. Today's show is brought to you by the folks at CRNA Financial Planning, an independent consulting firm that offers financial planning services exclusively to CRNAs and their families. From planning for a child's future college expenses to building a predictable income stream in retirement, the firm is committed to offering you comprehensive financial services, customized to fit your unique needs and objectives. If you have questions about your financial future, get them answered. Call the team at 855-304-3748. That's 855-304-3748. Or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
Hi, this is Jackie Rolls, President of the International Federation of Nurse Anesthetists and President and founder of Our Hearts, Your Hands, a global anesthesia support community that takes donations to allow nurse anesthetists in low and middle income countries to go to educational programs, buy equipment, or textbooks. Your donations are tax deductible, and we would appreciate your support.
OSA EMR is a free anesthesia EMR developed by CRNAs that you can download and use on an iPad. Our nonprofit mission is to make sure that solo and small practice CRNAs can digitally record their anesthetics. To learn more, visit osaemr.com to download and consider donating to our cause. Remember, for CRNAs, data is destiny.
Be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere you like to listen to shows. Also be sure to check out BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. Each episode is posted there with a corresponding blog post, and we timestamp important parts of the episode to help you quickly get to the content you're looking for. Also check out the special series section on the site. You can follow along and catch up on the CRNA History Series, episodes specifically about political conversations in the industry, or try the CRNA Personal Finance Series. It's all on BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And if you have a question for the show or want to be a guest, or even suggest a particular topic, fill out the contact form on the site or send an email directly to us at info@BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And lastly, let's take the conversation social. Check out our Beyond the Mask podcast Facebook page and Facebook group.